By the time Dante Duskwalker stood to testify, every one of the 11 council seats was occupied, every gallery rail was crowded, and the stone chamber carried that strained quiet that came only when people wanted blood dressed up as law. She could feel the old assembly hall from 6 years ago pressing against the inside of her ribs, the day she had been denied pack placement in public while people she trusted watched without moving. Her hands were steady anyway. The page in front of her was steady. Her voice was the only thing she did not trust, because voices remembered humiliation even when the rest of the body learned to fight. Raven sat at the center dais in black and silver, still as carved obsidian, the Alpha King whose silence could stall a room faster than any shouted order. He did not look at her for long. He did not need to. Dante felt the weight of his attention like a physical line across the chamber, brief, exact, impossible to mistake if she had allowed herself to name it. Across from her stood Marshal Ivar Thorne, the man who had raised her after her mother died, the man who had recommended her rejection at her coming of rank in 826, the man who now wore command steel with his hand resting lightly on the pommel as if this were an inspection, not an inquest that might end his career and his home. Chancellor Morkant Hale had already been pulled from his seat and placed under guard, though he still held his spine like he expected this whole thing to reverse in his favor. Lady Selene Voss sat at the recorder table with 3 inks open, transcript leaves stacked in disciplined rows, her face composed and pale. Tamsin Reed, 16 and shivering beside her, kept her eyes on Dante as if looking anywhere else might make the floor vanish. Dante heard her own name called and stepped forward. If she looked at Raven now, she would remember the private room and the question he had asked her there. Whether she had interrupted his winter council because she served someone's faction, or because she could not bear what Decree 47 would do to people like Tamsin. She had answered him with records and names and dates instead of fear. Tonight fear was back, waiting for her to stumble. "I testify by oath and by witness record," Dante said, and her voice held. Decree 47 was used to remove low-rank healers from infirmaries under color of border interrogation duty. Those healers became unaccounted for in 2 of the 7 Crown border packs. I have their requisition tags and the false return logs. A murmur rolled through the galleries and died when Raven lifted 2 fingers. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The chamber settled around him. Dante turned 1 page. "I saw Marshal Thorne sign transfer authority for one of those removals. I saw Chancellor Hale countersign." Ivar's jaw tightened, and in that instant she saw not the guardian who had taught her to set a splint, only the commander who had measured her worth against his ambitions and found it expendable. Raven spoke at last, each word cut clean. "You understand what naming them costs." Dante met his eyes in front of the whole court. "Yes." The old wound surged anyway, the memory of being told she did not belong, that she was useful only when quiet, that public rooms were where powerful people decided what happened to girls without bloodline. She felt the memory and did not bow to it. Raven stood. The chamber changed shape around that movement. "The testimony is entered. The decree stands void by royal authority. Morkant Hale is remanded for trial on charges of treason coordination. Marshal Ivar Thorne is stripped of command and sentenced to exile under the Blood Compact." The hall erupted in sound, shock and anger and relief tangled together, and through it, Dante heard only her own breath and the scrape of Raven stepping down from the dais toward her. He stopped in front of her where everyone could see them, where witnesses filled every line of sight, where no one could claim misunderstanding later. "When I recognized the bond, I chose not to speak until you could choose without coercion," Raven said, low but carrying. "Choose now, Dante Duskwalker, with full knowledge of what stands against us. I claim you as my mate and my consort only if you answer freely." 6 weeks earlier, When she first argued with his decree in front of his entire council, she had been certain he was dangerous in the way all kings were dangerous to women without rank. In this moment, she understood she had been reading armor and calling it cruelty, because cruelty was familiar. What stood before her now was risk. Real risk. His and hers. She heard herself answer before fear found language. I choose. Winter had started with a different chamber and a different kind of cold. Snow pressed against the high windows of the Night Court Council Hall, and Dante stood in the lower gallery with ward healers from the Royal Infirmary, ink stains still on her cuffs from night rounds. She was 23, low rank by every visible measure, and present only to deliver casualty ledgers. Her plan was simple: keep her head down, pass the records to a clerk, return to the infirmary before anyone with authority noticed she existed. The plan failed when Morkant rose to read Decree 47. He read it in a calm, legal voice: healer conscription into border interrogations, mandatory compliance across all 7 Crown border packs, minimum age set at 16, penalties for refusal tied to ration privileges and housing assignments. Around Dante, people listened with the detached attention reserved for policy that would hurt someone else. She counted 3 clauses before she realized what the language did. Healer neutrality was customary law, older than half the bloodlines in that room, grounded in prior rulings that kept infirmary workers outside military coercion. Morkant had written around it by calling interrogations stabilization procedures, as if changing the label erased what everyone understood. Her first hesitation was practical. A low-rank ward healer did not interrupt a king's council and keep her posting. Her second hesitation was older and sharper. Public rooms had punished her before. Morkant moved to close the vote. Ivar, seated at the command station as Marshal of the Palace Guard, inclined his head in approval. Dante saw his profile and felt 6 years collapse into one breath. In 826 he had spoken at her coming-of-rank assembly and recommended denial of placement on grounds of unstable lineage, an elegant phrase for unwanted. She had stood in that circle while names were called for everyone else. Her name had not been called. Morkant asked for final objections. Dante stood before she could talk herself into silence. Objection. The single word rang farther than she expected. Conversation snapped off around the hall. A clerk dropped a stylus. Someone in the upper row laughed once in disbelief. Raven, from the center seat, looked directly at her for the first time. His expression gave her nothing. Dante heard her pulse in her ears and kept speaking. Decree 47 violates healer neutrality by function, no matter what label is attached. Interrogation is coercive. A healer under coercive command cannot be trusted by the wounded. Once trust breaks, infirmaries become extensions of punishment. Morkant's tone stayed polite, which made it worse. State your name for the record. Dante Duskwalker, Royal Infirmary Ward Healer. The title landed badly. She saw it in the room. A low-rank nobody using the surname reserved for peripheral kin and retainers, not for people who challenged council policy. Morkant smiled without warmth. Ward Healer Duskwalker, your concern is noted. The decree concerns border security. Security decisions exceed your station. Dante felt the old impulse to fold in on herself, to survive by becoming forgettable. Tamsin's face stopped that impulse. The novice stood at the back with other trainees, young enough to still believe rules protected the decent. Decree 47 would send girls like her into interrogation rooms at 16. Dante lifted her chin. My station includes binding arterial wounds after border raids. If you conscript healers into interrogations, wounded prisoners and wounded citizens will both stop speaking to us. People will die for information they could have given in a treatment room. Ivar leaned forward. Enough. She turned toward him despite the warning in his voice. You taught me that triage works because everyone knows we do not ask political questions while blood is on the floor. You are choosing to erase your own training because Morkant needs bodies. A hiss moved through the council seats. Seleni's pen did not pause. Raven spoke without raising volume. Adjourned. The command struck like a hammer. Under the Night Charter emergency discretion, the king could unilaterally suspend in-session proceedings, and he used that authority so quickly the hall seemed to stumble trying to keep up. Guards moved to clear the room. Counselors protested. Raven ignored them all. His next words were for Dante alone. Stay. The room emptied around her in hard, efficient lines, and for one stretched minute she stood alone at the council table with snow light fading on stone, while Raven remained on the dais, unreadable. Fear arrived in practical forms. Suspension from infirmary duty, confinement, quiet transfer to a border post no one returned from. When he finally descended, he stopped close enough that she could smell winter cedar and steel oil. His eyes were storm gray, his control complete. You interrupted a sovereign session, he said. Was that conviction, or were you sent by a faction that wants the decree buried for other reasons? Dante swallowed. No faction would send me. I am useful to no one in this building. He watched her for a long second, and she had the unsettling sense that he was listening beneath her words for something involuntary. Bring me proof, he said. Not argument. Proof that Decree 47 is being used for witness erasure. You have one night. She stared at him. If I fail, you return to your ward and keep silent, or you leave the capital before someone else decides what to do with you. It sounded like threat. She accepted it as threat. Later she would realize he had given her a protected window in which no one could touch her without crossing him directly. In that moment she heard only the edge. Dante bowed and left before her knees could betray her. The infirmary at night smelled of iron, lavender wash, and exhaustion. Dante moved through bed rows, checking drains and fever charts while her mind mapped names from Morkant's decree to missing personnel logs. She found the first discrepancy in supply requisitions, healer transfer listed to Frostmere border post with no return entry. The second appeared in transport manifests, 2 signatures where protocol required 3, both signatures linked to command clerks under Ivar. The third came from a novice roster, where Tamsin's name had a provisional assignment mark coded for interrogation support. Dante copied everything by hand because official copies could vanish. She hid the pages under splint wraps in a locked cabinet and waited for dawn rounds to cover her next move. Tamsin found her before dawn, eyes red from no sleep. My assignment changed, she whispered. They said I report to border detail tomorrow. I am 16, and they said that made me eligible. Dante kept her voice level for the girl's sake. Who delivered the order? Marshal office runner. He had the red cord. Red cord meant command priority. Dante's stomach tightened. What did you do with the paper? Tamsin held it out, folded to near disintegration from repeated handling. Dante read the signature block and saw Ivar's countersign where no countersign should have been. She felt anger clear her fear like wind clearing smoke. Stay on infirmary grounds, Dante said. Do not walk alone. If anyone asks, you are on fever watch in Ward C. Tamsin nodded too quickly. Will that keep me safe? No, Dante said, because false comfort would fail her later. It gives us time. By mid-morning, Dante was back in the council annex with a packet that could end her posting or save lives. Selene met her at a side corridor, recorder sash hidden under a plain cloak. The 2 women had traded quiet favors for years, chart corrections, transcript access, tiny acts of institutional mercy. I can place this in preliminary record, Selene murmured, but once it enters, Morkant can see it. He will see it anyway if Raven asks for proof. Selene studied her face. You know this puts Ivar in the chain. Dante did not answer immediately. Ivar had fed her when she was a child. Ivar had taught her which plants eased fever. Ivar had watched her be denied at 17 and said it was necessary stability. Loving someone and fearing them could occupy the same body for years without either yielding. She gave Celine the packet. Enter it. Raven summoned her before noon. The private audience chamber was smaller than council halls and colder, built for decisions that required no witness. He read in silence while she stood opposite with hands clasped behind her back to hide the tremor. When he reached Tamsin's assignment order, his jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. How many missing? Confirmed 3 from transfer logs, likely more. 2 from North Glass and 1 from Ash Vane. Both are among the 7 border packs under Crown Watch. You said likely more. Unmatched requisition tags suggest 5 total. I cannot prove the other 2 without command archive access. He set the pages down with care that looked like control under strain. Who else knows? Celine entered a partial transcript. Good. She blinked, surprised by approval. He rose and moved to the window, his back to her. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Less decree, more calculation. I am placing Tamsin under quiet crown protection. She stays near you. 2 shadow guards outside your ward, plain clothes. If anyone asks, they are supply clerks. Dante heard the words and mistrusted them. Protection from a king could become possession in a single order. She searched his face for motive and found only that same controlled distance. Why keep this quiet? She asked, because open protection warns the people trying to erase witnesses. The answer was tactically sound, which did not make her feel safer. She bowed. As you command. He looked at her then with a focus that made the room feel narrower. I gave no command about your judgment. Keep using it. She left with that sentence lodged under her ribs, unable to decide whether it was respect or manipulation. The first attempt to silence Tamsin came 2 nights later during medicine deliveries. A covered cart entered Ward C with fresh bandages, one driver marked with infirmary credentials Dante did not recognize. She caught the mismatch because he reached for the restricted cabinet before signing intake, a small procedural error no one outside Ward's made. Dante stepped between him and the cabinet. Name and assignment. He smiled too quickly and shoved the cart toward her knees. Glass shattered across stone, tincture fumes filling the air. In the confusion, he went for Tamsin, who had been sorting linens near the rear exit. Dante moved before thought, hooking her arm through the cart handle and yanking hard. The cart tipped into the man's path. He stumbled, struck his temple on the iron bed frame, and bolted through the service door as shadow guards closed too late. No one died. That counted as mercy in palace politics. Raven arrived minutes later with 2 captains and a face carved from fury. He took in the broken glass. Tamsin shaking against the wall, the smear of blood on Dante's sleeve where splinters had cut her. Seal the ward, he ordered. Check every credential issued this week. Detain all runners tied to Command Red Cord. Dante expected him to question her first, maybe accuse her of staging panic. Instead, he stepped close enough to inspect her cut, and his hand hovered near her wrist without touching. You are hurt. It is shallow. His gaze lifted to her eyes. You did not move away from the threat. She almost laughed from sheer strain. I tripped over a cart. You lied badly, he said, and for a breath there was something like dry humor in him before the mask returned. The failed attempt resolved one uncertainty for everyone involved. Decree 47 was no longer legal debate. It was a weapon already in use. That certainty forced the next decision. Raven convened a limited inquiry with Selene recording and only 4 council members present, none from Morcant's loyal bloc. Dante gave the ward account. Tamsin could not stop shaking long enough to speak. Ivar requested direct access to the witness for security reassurance, which Raven denied without explanation. Dante misread the denial as tactical distrust of her, as if Raven planned to replace her with someone easier to manage. She had spent 6 years expecting withdrawal the moment she became inconvenient. Her wound interpreted every silence as retreat. Raven saw her face harden and said nothing. In his quiet, she heard dismissal. 2 days later, the second attempt came from inside the infirmary itself. A sedative vial in Tamsin's evening tea dose carried a concentration high enough to stop breathing in a small body. Dante caught it by smell before administration, crushed bitterroot beneath a floral masking agent no ward apothecary used. She locked the vial in a specimen box and sent for Celia and Raven simultaneously. The response time told its own story. Raven arrived first, breath fogging from the cold corridor as if he had come at a run. Dante handed him the vial. Whoever changed this had access to supply keys. He looked at Tamsin, pale and rigid in bed. How many had access? 7 tonight, including me. 2 were command liaisons attached last week by Ivar's office. Raven closed his hand around the vial so hard the glass creaked. Remove command liaisons from infirmary jurisdiction immediately. Post-Crown key wards, no substitutions. After he issued orders, he remained while the room cleared. Dante expected interrogation, maybe reproach for not preventing the breach sooner. Instead, he stood by Tamsin's bed and watched the girl sleep under mild, calming herbs, his profile harder than stone and more tired than she had ever seen him. He spoke without looking at Dante. In 8:30, I trusted someone with my private seal. She sold movement schedules to a rival pack and called it necessary leverage. 21 died in the border pass before we traced the breach. Dante went still. He never offered personal history. Court gossip called it a scandal, whispered that his former intended had betrayed him and left him colder than winter iron. Hearing him state numbers and blame without drama made the wound feel immediate and human. I centralized council power after that, he continued. I told myself attachment was a vulnerability enemies could measure. I built rules around that belief. He turned then, and the distance in his eyes was not indifference. It was effort. The effort of a man crossing ground he had sworn never to cross. Dante understood a little and distrusted her understanding at the same time. People in power disclosed pain for strategic reasons all the time. Her own history with Ivar had taught her that tenderness and control could wear the same face. What do you want from me? She asked. The same thing I asked in the chamber. Proof and judgment. That is all. His mouth tightened, almost a bitter smile. No. It is what I am allowed to ask before you can answer freely. The sentence unsettled her more than any order. She did not yet have language for what he was protecting. Pressure mounted outside the infirmary. Morkant pushed emergency briefings in closed council, arguing that witness panic justified immediate enactment of Decree 47. Ivar increased guard patrols in healer districts under pretext of public stability. Rumors spread that Dante had fabricated both attempts to gain favor. When she crossed the lower courtyard, people either looked away or stared openly, as if deciding whether she was brave or suicidal. Celine found her in archives near midnight and placed a transcript leaf on the table. Morkant met with Ivar 3 days before Winter Council in the old map room. No recorder present. I found a scheduling discrepancy because they altered patrol logs to hide overlap. Dante scanned the page. Can this tie them to missing healers? Indirectly, enough to justify warrant requests if you testify to chain of custody. There it was, the next cost. Testifying would set her against Ivar publicly, not as policy disagreement, as legal accusation. She had spent years owing him for childhood shelter, even while resenting the debt he kept collecting from her silence. That night, Dante could not sleep. She sat in the infirmary laundry room with steam rising around her and replayed 826 in relentless detail, the circle of elders, Ivar's voice recommending denial, the careful words about stability, the way no one spoke for her. She had told herself for 6 years that keeping peace with him was practical. The truth was harsher. Part of her still believed public opposition to him would confirm what everyone had said, that she was disloyal, unruly, unfit. Tamsin came in barefoot, unable to rest. "If they call me to speak," she whispered, "I will faint." Dante pulled a blanket over the girl's shoulders. "You might faint. You can still speak first." Tamsin gave a watery laugh. "That sounds like healer advice." "It is." At dawn, Raven summoned Dante to the training terrace above the eastern wall, a place with open sightlines and no hiding corners. He dismissed his escorts to the stair landing and faced her alone in the wind. "I have enough to move against Morcant," he said. "I do not have enough to survive the legal counterattack unless witnesses testify under oath. Seleni's transcript and Tamsin's testimony satisfy arrest legality with my seal. Your testimony binds Ivar to the chain." Dante held his gaze. "You can proceed without me." "I can proceed and lose in trial." He stepped closer, voice lower. "If you testify, Ivar falls. His allies will target you openly. I can protect you from many things. I cannot erase consequence." She felt the apparent impossibility close around them. If she testified, she burned the last bridge to the only guardian she had known. If she stayed silent, Tamsin would remain prey, and Decree 47 would survive long enough to take others. "What do you lose if you choose this?" she asked. "An alliance with the Thorn command block that has stabilized 2 border routes since 830. If I exile him under Blood Compact limits, I fracture that block before spring campaigns." The words landed with the weight of real governance, not romance. Choosing her and this case would cost him military leverage when 7 border packs already strained supply lines. For the first time, she believed his earlier warning about consequence had included himself. Raven's jaw set as if he had decided something he disliked. For one brief instant, the narrative slipped toward his interior. The alpha instinct he had spent years disciplining now fixed on one fact. Dante's safety had become non-negotiable to him in a way policy could not explain. He hated that truth because it threatened the structure he used to keep people alive, and he accepted it because denying it had already failed. When he spoke again, he was fully controlled. "I will not command your answer." Dante heard the space he gave her and understood the respect inside it. "I testify." Preparations moved fast once she committed. Selene compiled sworn witness record templates. Crown jurists reviewed prior rulings on healer neutrality and confirmed enforceability under customary law. Raven signed preliminary warrants with a temporary seal ring because his primary seal remained locked until public session. Tamsin practiced her statement in short bursts, hands shaking less each day. Ivar requested private contact with Dante twice. Raven denied both requests. Dante interpreted the denials as possessive control until Selene quietly explained that unsupervised contact would invalidate testimony by creating coercion claims. Even protection carried legal architecture she had never needed to consider before. On the eve of the hearing, Ivar cornered Dante anyway in the chapel cloister, where no guards were posted during evening prayers. He looked older than she remembered, gray at the temples, eyes hard with urgency. "You are being used," he said. "Morcant is ruthless, yes, but Raven is colder. He will discard you after this." Dante kept distance from the column shadows. "You signed transfer orders for a 16-year-old novice. For strategic questioning, temporary. 2 people are missing." His voice sharpened. "Do you think low-rank healers survive border work by purity? We make compromises so the kingdom holds." There it was, the philosophy behind every wound she carried. People like her were acceptable losses measured in ledgers. She asked one question that had lived in her for 6 years. "At my coming of rank assembly in 826, did you believe I was unfit? Or did you need me unplaced so I stayed under your authority?" Ivar looked away first. "Both." The answer ended whatever debt remained. Dante left him in the cloister and did not look back. Morning arrived sharp and bright, snow glare bouncing off the courtyard stones. The The hearing opened before full council because legal legitimacy required all 11 seats present for charges at this rank. Morkant entered under guard with his hands bound in ceremonial chain. Ivar took his place at defense table in plain command coat, stripped of martial insignia pending judgment. Celine read procedural foundations into record, Knight Charter Authority for King's Session Control, Healer Neutrality Precedent, Witness Chain Standards. Raven listened without expression from the center dais. Tamsin testified first to establish immediate risk. Her voice shook through the first lines and steadied when she described assignment orders and the cart assault in Ward C. Dante watched the girl become visible to power and survive the sight of it. Selene entered transcript pages as they were spoken. Dante testified second. She presented transfer logs, requisition tags, sedative vial chain, and the cloister admission from Ivar. Defense counsel tried to break her on procedural gaps. Why only 3 confirmed missing when she claimed likely 5? Why she had copied records by hand? Why she had waited overnight before filing? She answered each challenge with grounded detail. 3 are confirmed because those files include matching transfer and false return entries. 2 are likely because requisition tags exist without full archive access, which I lacked until this inquiry. Hand copies were necessary because central records had already been altered once. I waited one night because Raven required proof within one night, and because moving sooner without chain support would have buried the evidence. The council chamber listened. When Ivar stood to speak, he did not deny signatures. He defended necessity, framing Decree 47 as hard governance in dangerous times. Morkant leaned into the same argument: security over custom, flexibility over doctrine, youthful healers as underused assets. The language was polished and bloodless. Raven asked one question. Did either of you seek a neutrality waiver from Infirmary Authority before transfers? Morkant hesitated. The urgency made waiver impractical. So no. Ivar said nothing. Raven looked to Selena. Do we have sworn witness record from Recorder and Novice? Celine rose. Yes, Your Majesty. Complete and sealed. Tamsin stood as well, trembling but upright. I swear to my testimony. That satisfied legal threshold. Raven pressed his signet into hot wax on the warrant tablet. Morkant's composure broke for the first time when guards stepped in. Judgment moved next because delaying would risk witness retaliation. Raven's voice carried through the chamber with the full force of throne authority. Decree 47 is void effective immediately. Healer neutrality is reaffirmed across all 7 Crown border pacts under prior ruling authority. Chancellor Morkant Hale is remanded for imprisonment pending treason coordination trial. Marshal Ivar Thorne, absent battlefield treason and bound by blood compact constraints, is sentenced to exile and permanent removal from command. Ivar exhaled once, almost a laugh stripped of humor. You choose this healer over a command alliance, Raven answered without pause. I choose the law you broke, and the lives you treated as expendable. As guards moved them out, Ivar looked at Dante, not pleading, not angry, only measuring what he could no longer control. She held his gaze until he turned away. The chamber erupted as factions realized what had shifted. Morkant's bloc shouted procedural protests. Healer delegates in the back rows wept openly. Border captains conferred in tight, alarmed knots, already calculating what exile of a high officer meant for spring operations. Raven let the noise crest before raising his hand. Quiet returned in layers. He stepped down from the dais and stopped before Dante, where witnesses filled every angle, where public memory would carry whatever happened next beyond anyone's editing. When I first noticed you, you were arguing triage protocol with a captain who outranked you by 3 tiers, he said, and surprise rippled because no one had expected personal words in formal session. You were wrong on one dosage and right on every principle. You corrected yourself and held your ground, I remembered. Dante's throat tightened. She had no memory of that moment. To her, it had been another ordinary argument in a corridor. Raven continued, voice lower now but still clear. The bond recognized you before I allowed myself to acknowledge it. Recognition compels nothing. Choice remains. I delayed because kings can coerce without touching, and I would not make your answer another decree. He held out his hand. Dante Duskwalker, before this council and this court, I claim you as mate and consort only if you choose me freely with full cost known. She felt the old wound flare one last time, the fear that public attention meant humiliation, that a powerful man's promise would collapse once useful. She also felt the present, Tamsin alive behind her, Celine standing steady, Decree 47 broken. Ivar already escorted toward exile gates by guards who no longer took his orders. Her choice had costs. If she accepted, every enemy of Ravens would measure her first. If she refused, she could return to a quieter life shaped by service and caution. The decision was real, and because it was real, so was her answer. I choose you, she said. The bond settled without spectacle. No lightning, no shouted prophecy, only a felt alignment in her chest, like a door that had resisted for years finally fitting its frame. Raven's shoulders eased by a fraction visible only to someone standing this close. He brought her hand to his heart in the old pack gesture of public vow. Then hear mine, he said. You are under my protection, and I am under yours. The inversion startled the chamber more than the claim itself. Kings did not often frame vows as mutual vulnerability. Lady Celine, still at recorder table, smiled for the first time that day and immediately hid it behind professional composure. Tamsin cried without trying to hide it at all. Exile formalities concluded by dusk. Under blood compact limits, Ivar departed through the northern gate with a 12-rider escort and no right of return unless recalled by unanimous council vote, a threshold no one expected him to meet. Dante watched from a parapet with Raven beside her, both cloaked against wind. I thought I would feel triumph, she admitted. What do you feel? Lighter. Sick. Sad for the child version of me who kept waiting for him to choose me. Raven nodded as if she had reported weather with tactical relevance. Grief after clarity is normal. She glanced at him. Was that from personal experience or command training? A faint line touched his mouth, that same dry humor she had seen once in Ward C. Both. The days after judgment were harder than the ceremony. Morcant's loyalists launched legal challenges, arguing royal overreach and recorder bias. Raven met each challenge in open docket, forcing transparency that blunted conspiracy claims. Dante moved into consort quarters temporarily and discovered that every corridor now carried scrutiny. Servants bowed too deeply. Courtiers tested boundaries with sugar-coated insults. Protection did not erase hierarchy overnight. She answered by working. At dawn, she returned to the infirmary, this time with Crown authority to audit transfer practices. She appointed rotating neutral watchers for any military request involving healers. Celine drafted record standards that required dual seals for personnel movement in all 7 border packs. Tamsin stayed close, apprenticing under senior medics with additional guard coverage that gradually became less visible as threats receded. Raven's costly choice kept unfolding in political ledgers. Exiling Ivar fractured the Thorn command block exactly as predicted, forcing Raven to reassign patrol leadership before spring thaw. 2 border routes reported increased raid pressure in early 833, and rivals probed for weakness. Council critics called his decisions emotional and reckless. He answered by taking personal command of one disputed route for 3 weeks, sleeping in forward camps and negotiating direct support from neutral packs that trusted healer protections. Each move signaled the same message. His claim of Dante was not a private indulgence. It had become state policy backed by personal risk and operational labor. Dante saw the toll in him when he returned. Thinner, eyes shadowed, control still intact. She stopped waiting for him to admit strain and started placing tea and brief summaries on his desk before he asked. He started asking her view on supply debates before issuing orders. Their speech patterns shifted with this trust, his becoming less decree, hers less defensive argument. In spring of 833, reform package hearings opened with full council attendance. Dante presented the proposed codification, healer neutrality as statutory law rather than custom alone, independent witness protection under Crown and Recorder oversight, automatic review for any policy affecting minors with a clear floor at 16 for assignment restrictions, and explicit prohibition of coercive interrogation roles regardless of age. Counselors pressed hard. Some feared hamstringing security forces. Some wanted exceptions broad enough to swallow the rule. Dante held line clause by clause, speaking from case evidence rather than moral abstraction. Celine supported with transcript references and precedent citations. Raven intervened only when debate drifted toward intimidation tactics. The package passed by 8 votes to 3, more than enough to survive appeal. Public response shifted in slow, tangible ways. Healers who had avoided border posts returned under new safeguards. Families began sending injured sons and daughters to infirmaries without asking which faction controlled the ward. Novices signed training rosters at higher rates because apprenticeship no longer implied hidden military conscription. Tamsin completed her first independent trauma stabilization during a market fire and went home, shaking and proud. One evening, she found Dante in the herb courtyard and said, "I still get scared when boots stop outside my door." Dante nodded. "I still do too." Tamsin absorbed that and smiled, comforted by honesty more than reassurance. "I thought queens were supposed to say brave things." "I am relief steward first," Dante said. "My job is accurate things." The formal mating rite took place at midsummer in the open court, attended by council, healers, border captains, and citizens who had followed the trials like weather reports for their own futures. Raven stood in ceremonial black, Dante in silver gray rather than royal white by her own request, a quiet refusal to erase where she came from. When the officiant asked for vows, Raven kept his concise. "I will not use the throne to silence what I need to hear." Dante answered with equal clarity. "I will not confuse fear with truth, and I will name danger even when naming it costs us." The crowd murmured approval, not at romance alone, at the practical covenant embedded in those lines. After the rite, Raven drew her aside to the upper balcony where the city roofs glowed in evening light. He rested his forearms on stone and looked out toward the distant border mountains. "I used to think control was the only form of care that scaled to a kingdom," he said. "Control kept structures standing. It also kept me alone inside them." Dante stood beside him, shoulder touching shoulder. "I used to think being chosen by power would erase what happened in 826. It did not erase it." "What changed?" "I do not measure myself by the room that rejected me anymore. I measure by the rooms I protected after." He turned to her with that focused attention that still made the world narrow. "That is one reason I chose you." She gave him a look halfway between fondness and challenge. "Only one. Among several." By autumn, the kingdom had adjusted enough that crisis no longer occupied every waking hour. Morkant remained imprisoned awaiting final treason coordination judgment, his networks dismantled through records seized under lawful warrant. Ivar's exile held. No recall motion reached council floor. The 2 missing healers from Northglass were found alive in a labor camp beyond Crown boundary and repatriated under border accord, while the 3rd, confirmed missing from Ash Vein, was mourned with full honors when recovery teams identified her remains. The likely 2 unresolved names remained under active investigation, their families now receiving direct updates instead of silence. Dante attended each family meeting personally when possible. Queens could delegate grief. She chose not to. Raven watched her in those rooms, and recognized the same quality that had caught him long before either of them admitted what it meant. Moral seriousness expressed through repetitive, unglamorous action under pressure. That recognition had begun as instinct and matured into choice repeated in governance, in marriage, in daily habit. He never stopped feeling the instinctive pull of the bond. He never treated it as excuse. Dante still misread him sometimes when he went silent in strategic meetings and she assumed withdrawal where he was weighing risk. He still defaulted to command phrasing when afraid and forgot to explain his reasoning. They learned to correct quickly, because both had lived too long under the cost of unspoken assumptions. On the anniversary of Winter Council, Selina delivered bound transcripts of the Decree 47 proceedings to the Royal Archive and one private copy to Dante's office. The cover bore no embellishment, only date and session number. Dante ran her fingers over the plain leather and felt gratitude for records that could not be argued away. Celine lingered at the door. "I wanted you to have this before it becomes history someone else summarizes." Dante smiled. "You plan to let me retire before you?" "Unlikely." They shared a brief laugh, the kind built from surviving the same storm without needing to narrate it again. That night, snow began early. Dante stood at the council chamber threshold, where she had once interrupted a room designed to ignore her. The seats were empty now, 11 carved backs catching moonlight. Quiet and waiting for future conflicts no reform could prevent entirely. Institutions healed slower than bodies. Some damage left scars that improved function if tended, and stiffened it if neglected. Raven approached behind her without announcing himself. She knew his presence before sound, a felt shift in air she had stopped resisting. "You are counting seats," he said. "I used to count exits in this room. What changed?" "I count who is accountable now." He took her hand. No audience, no decree, no need for spectacle because the public part had already been done and held. The story that began with her arguing against his decree in front of his entire council ended with a different kind of authority. Shared, tested, and specific. Decree 47 remained void. Healer neutrality stood codified in 833. Independent witness protection functioned under the standards she and Celine wrote. Tamsin remained under Crown protection until she requested ordinary posting and received it by merit, not favor. Morcant waited in a cell built for men who mistook manipulation for governance. Ivar rode exile roads beyond the northern markers, alive because law constrained revenge, absent because law constrained him too. Dante's original wound had been public rejection in 826, a message that she was not worth choosing when choices were witnessed. Its answer came in public too, not through flattery, through visible commitment under cost, repeated until disbelief had no structure left to stand on. Raven's wound had been betrayal in 830, a lesson that attachment invited strategic death. Its answer came when he chose trust, knowing exactly what instability it introduced, and refused to retreat when that instability arrived on schedule. Near midnight they left the chamber and walked toward the infirmary wing, where a late trauma call had arrived from the lower market, and Dante insisted on checking the intake herself. Raven did not argue. He accompanied her through corridors that once would have separated King from ward work, and guards adjusted routes around them without comment because this had become ordinary. In Ward C, a child with a fractured arm stared at Raven's crown clasp and forgot to cry for 3 full seconds. Dante knelt beside the bed and said gently, "He looks severe, I know. He can hold the splint if you want to test whether kings are useful." The child blinked, considered, and nodded solemnly. Raven accepted the splint board with absolute seriousness, while Dante set the bone in one clean motion. The child yelped, then settled when Raven kept his grip steady and his voice low. "Breathe," he said. "You are safe." Dante looked up once and met his eyes over the child's small hand wrapped in gauze. The line between personal vow and public duty had disappeared into practice. exactly where she wanted it. When they finished rounds, they stepped back into the corridor where dawn had not yet touched the windows. Snowlight reflected faintly off stone. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence held no misreading now, only shared fatigue and shared direction. Dante leaned against the wall and exhaled. 6 weeks ago, I thought private audience meant I was about to be punished for speaking. Raven studied her face. 6 weeks ago, I thought adjourning that session would preserve control. It did not. No, it began something better. He offered his hand again, a familiar gesture now, less ceremony than daily choice. She took it, and they walked toward whatever the next council session would demand. No longer strangers in opposite hierarchies, no longer protected and protector as fixed roles, but two people who had paid the cost of being seen accurately and chosen anyway.